Today, we have a story about a woman whose nimble fingers could transform cloth into dreams, but whose life was woven with threads of quiet terror. This is the account of Abigail Foster, a seamstress of extraordinary talent, whose story was nearly lost to time until these pages were discovered in the basement of an old textile mill in Richmond, Virginia. If you enjoyed this story, consider subscribing and becoming part of our community. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. We love hearing from our amazing viewers all around the world. From the private journal of Abigail Foster, seamstress, written in her own hand between April and November of 1860. Recovered from the archives of Whitmore Textile Mill, Richmond, Virginia. By Virginia. My name is Abigail Foster. I am 26 years old, and I possess a gift that has been both blessing and burden since I first held a needle at age 7. I can see a finished garment in my mind as clearly as if it already exists, complete with every pleat, every gather, every delicate stitch. My mother said I was touched by grace. My grandmother whispered it was something older, something passed down through blood and memory. I live in a small room above Mrs. Dalton's boarding house on Elm Street, where the morning light comes through at an angle perfect for threading needles. The house holds 6 other residents, 2 factory workers, a widow, a clerk, and 2 washerwomen who sing hymns while they scrub. We share meals at a long table where conversation flows like warm honey, full of small kindnesses and shared burdens. My days begin before dawn. I walk 3 blocks to Whitmore Textile Mill, where I work as head seamstress in the private commission workshop. The mill itself is a massive brick structure that dominates the eastern edge of town, its windows like dark eyes watching the streets below. Inside, the main floor churns with the thunder of looms, but my workshop occupies a separate wing, quiet and removed. It was Mr. Cornelius Whitmore himself who hired me 2 years ago, after I repaired a torn waistcoat for his wife with such precision that she could not find where the fabric had been damaged. He is a tall man with silver hair and pale eyes that never seem to blink quite enough. His voice is soft, always soft, like velvet over stone. "You have a rare talent, Abigail," he said during that first meeting. "I pay well for rare things, but I require absolute dedication. My clients expect perfection, and perfection demands sacrifice." I nodded, grateful for the opportunity. The pay was indeed generous, more than I had ever earned. I did not yet understand what he meant by sacrifice. The workshop has rules. They were explained to me on my first day by Miss Virginia, the previous head seamstress, a thin woman with nervous hands who left the position after only 8 months. "Never speak of the clients," she whispered. "Never ask questions about the garments. Never, ever, enter Mr. Whitmore's private office unless summoned. And if you hear the bell ring 3 times at midnight, stay in your room with the door locked." I laughed nervously. Why would a bell ring at midnight in a textile mill? Miss Virginia's face went pale as flour. She gripped my wrist with surprising strength. "Just remember what I told you." She left Richmond the next morning. I never saw her again. For the first few months, the work was demanding but satisfying. I created wedding gowns of such beauty that brides wept when they saw themselves in mirrors. I tailored suits that transformed ordinary men into gentlemen. My fingers flew across silk and velvet, cotton and wool, bringing forth garments that seemed to hold light within their folds. But there were oddities I could not explain. Sometimes I would arrive to find a bolt of fabric laid across my table that I had not requested. Dark fabrics, always dark, with a texture that felt wrong against my skin, almost warm, almost breathing. Mr. Whitmore would appear in the doorway, his pale eyes fixed upon me. "A special commission," he would say softly, "due by sunrise. No mistakes, Abigail, no mistakes." And I would work through the night, my lamp burning low, my fingers moving as if guided by something outside myself, stitching garments whose purpose I dared not imagine. When morning came, the finished pieces would be gone, and Mr. Whitmore would leave an envelope of extra payment on my table. The money was good, the work was steady, but on certain nights, when the mill fell silent and the darkness pressed against the windows, I would hear footsteps in the corridor outside my workshop. Slow, measured footsteps that stopped precisely at my door, then retreated without ever knocking. This morning, as I threaded my needle with crimson silk, I noticed something that made my hands still. There, in the corner of my workshop, where the shadows pooled deepest, was a stain on the wooden floor, dark and old, shaped like a handprint. It had not been there yesterday. The handprint troubled me throughout the day. though I told myself it was merely old wood staining unevenly. I focused on my work, a christening gown for the mayor's granddaughter, all white lace and delicate embroidery. My fingers moved with practiced ease, but my mind kept returning to that dark impression in the corner. It was near dusk when Mr. Whitmore entered my workshop without knocking. He never knocked. His footsteps were always silent until he was already present, as if he materialized from the air itself. "Abigail," he said, his voice carrying that peculiar softness that made my skin prickle. "I have received a complaint." I set down my needle carefully. "Sir, Mrs. Henderson claims the evening gown you completed last week was not to her specifications. She says the hem was uneven." My chest tightened. I had measured that hem 3 times, as I did with every garment. "I assure you, Mr. Whitmore, the measurements were precise. I checked them myself before delivery." He stepped closer, his pale eyes studying my face with an intensity that made me want to look away. I did not. My mother had taught me that to look away was to admit fault, even when no fault existed. "Are you suggesting Mrs. Henderson is lying?" His voice remained soft, but something cold moved beneath it. "No, sir. I am saying I completed the work as requested. Perhaps there was a misunderstanding about the original specifications." The silence that followed stretched like pulled thread. Mr. Whitmore's expression did not change, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Finally, he smiled, a thin movement of lips that never reached his eyes. "I see how confident you are." He walked to my work table, running one finger along the edge of the christening gown. "Confidence is dangerous for someone in your position, Abigail. It leads to carelessness, and carelessness leads to mistakes. I have made no mistake, sir." He picked up my sewing scissors, opening and closing them slowly. The metal whispered in the quiet. "Then explain to me why 3 of your predecessors also displayed such confidence before their unfortunate departures." My heart began to beat faster, but I kept my voice steady. "I cannot speak for others, Mr. Whitmore. I can only speak for my own work." He set the scissors down with a sharp click. "You will remake Mrs. Henderson's gown, without additional payment. You will deliver it within 3 days. And you will remember, Abigail, that your position here is not as secure as you seem to believe." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Oh, and you are now required to remain in the workshop until all daily commissions are complete, regardless of our... I have had a cot brought in for your convenience. You may visit your boarding house on Sundays only. But sir, the new arrangement begins tomorrow." He closed the door behind him with a soft click. I stood alone in the workshop, my hands trembling despite my best efforts to still them. The injustice of it burned in my throat, but I knew better than to protest further. I had seen what happened to colored folk who pushed too hard against those with power. My position was precarious enough without adding insubordination to my perceived faults. That night, I worked late on the christening gown, trying to lose myself in the familiar rhythm of needle and thread. The lamp cast long shadows across the room, and more than once I found my eyes drawn to that handprint in the corner. It was darker now. I was certain of it. Near midnight, I heard it, the bell, ringing 3 times in slow succession. The sound came from somewhere deep within the mill, resonant and hollow. I thought of Miss Virginia's warning and felt a chill race down my spine. I gathered my things quickly and prepared to leave. But when I tried the workshop door, it would not open. The lock had been engaged from the outside. I was trapped through the small window in the door. I saw a shadow pass in the corridor, then another. They moved without sound, gliding along the walls like ink spreading through water. I pressed myself against the far wall, my breath coming in short gasps. The shadows paused outside my door. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, something slid a piece of paper beneath the door. When the shadows finally moved on, I approached with shaking hands and picked up the paper. Written in a spidery hand were 5 words. They were seamstresses too. "Run." The cot Mr. Whitmore provided was narrow and hard, positioned in the corner of the workshop where the handprints stained the floor. I did not sleep that first night. Instead, I sat at my work table with every lamp burning, watching the shadows and wondering who had slipped that warning beneath my door. By morning, I had convinced myself to stay calm. I needed this position. The pay allowed me to send money to my younger sister in Charleston, keeping her fed and clothed while she attended school. Without my wages, she would be forced into factory work, or worse. I could endure discomfort for her sake, but the discomfort grew daily. Mr. Whitmore implemented new rules with increasing frequency. I was no longer permitted to speak with the other mill workers. My meals were brought to the workshop by a young boy who refused to meet my eyes. I was forbidden from opening the windows, even as the summer heat made the room stifling. The bolts of strange warm fabric appeared more often, always accompanied by Mr. Whitmore's soft instructions for overnight completion. "A special client," he would murmur, "very particular, very private." The garments I created during those long nights disturbed me in ways I could not articulate. They were beautiful, technically perfect, but they felt wrong. The fabric seemed to resist my needle at times, as if it had a will of its own, and when I finished, when I held up the completed piece in the lamplight, I sometimes thought I saw shapes moving within the weave of the cloth, like shadows trapped beneath ice. I tried to speak of my concerns to Mr. Whitmore once. He listened with that unsettling patience, then smiled. "You are overtired, Abigail. The work is demanding. Perhaps you need stronger discipline to maintain focus." The next day, he removed my chair. I was required to stand while I worked, sometimes for 12 hours without rest. When I swayed from exhaustion, he would appear in the doorway, watching until I steadied myself. "Discipline," he would say softly. "Perfection requires sacrifice." It was during the 3rd week of my confinement to the workshop that I met Thomas. He was the night watchman, a quiet man of perhaps 40 years with kind eyes and graying hair. He appeared at my door one evening carrying a cup of water and a piece of bread wrapped in cloth. "Thought you might be hungry," he said, keeping his voice low. "Saw you ain't been eating much of what they bring." I accepted gratefully. "Thank you, I am. The meals have been sparse." Thomas glanced down the corridor, then back to me. "I knew the others. You know, the seamstresses who had this workshop before you. 5 of them in 3 years. My hands stilled. What happened to them? Disappeared, mostly. 1 left in the night and never came back. 2 went mad, talking about shadows and bells and hands reaching from the walls. The last one," he paused, his expression troubled. "They found her in the river, said she jumped, but I ain't never believed it." Cold fear settled in my stomach. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I see how he watches you, same way he watched them, and I see you fighting to keep yourself whole." He reached into his pocket and produced a small key. "This opens the old record room in the basement. Something down there you need to see. Documents about this place, about what Mr. Whitmore really does with those special commissions. I cannot leave my workshop. The door is locked each night." Thomas held up another key. No more. But you got to be careful. He has eyes everywhere." After he left, I sat holding the keys, feeling their weight like a promise and a threat. I wanted to dismiss his warnings as superstition, but I could not. Too much had already proven strange beyond explanation. That night, I waited until the mill fell silent. Using Thomas's key, I slipped from my workshop and descended the stairs to the basement. The record room was behind a door marked storage, filled with filing cabinets and dusty ledgers by candlelight. I searched until I found a ledger marked private commissions. Inside were entries dating back 15 years, each listing a client name, a garment type, and a date. But beside each entry was another notation, written in Mr. Whitmore's distinctive hand. "Delivered, contract fulfilled, payment received." The payments were not in dollars. They were listed in other terms: 7 years, vitality, youth restored, illness transferred, death postponed. My hands shook as I turned the pages. Near the end, I found entries for garments I had created. Beside my work were notations I could barely comprehend. Morning gown. Client, Mrs. Helena Ashford. Payment, transfer of consumption from client to seamstress. 3 months. I thought of the cough I had developed recently. The weakness in my lungs I had attributed to poor ventilation. Another entry, evening suit. Client, Senator Marcus Doyle. Payment, transfer of aging burden. 6 months to seamstress. I held up my hands in the candlelight and saw, for the first time, how the skin had begun to thin, how my knuckles had started to ache as my grandmother's once had. Mr. Whitmore was not paying me in money alone. He was paying me in borrowed time, stolen health, transferred suffering. And with each garment I created, I was weaving my own death. A sound echoed from upstairs. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, descending toward the basement. I extinguished the candle and pressed myself behind a filing cabinet, my heart thundering. Through the darkness, I heard Mr. Whitmore's voice, soft as always. "I know you are here, Abigail. I know what you have discovered. The question now is, what you intend to do with that knowledge." I held my breath in the darkness of the record room, pressed against the cold metal of the filing cabinet. Mr. Whitmore's footsteps stopped just outside the door. Through the gap beneath it, I could see the glow of his lamp, steady and patient. "Come out, Abigail. Let us discuss this reasonably." I did not move, could not move. The ledger was still clutched in my trembling hands, its pages full of impossible transactions, of lives traded like currency. After a long silence, his footsteps retreated back up the stairs. But I knew this was not mercy. It was strategy. I waited until the mill fell completely silent before emerging. Thomas found me in the corridor, his face pale with worry. "You need to leave this place tonight," he whispered urgently. "I've seen him like this before, all calm and patient. It means he's planning something terrible. I have nowhere to go, and even if I run, he will find me. You said yourself the others disappeared. Then you got to expose him. Tell someone with power what's happening here. Who would believe me?" I held up the ledger. "This reads like madness. They would say I am hysterical, or worse." Thomas took the ledger gently from my hands. "Then we need more than words. We need witnesses, proof that cannot be denied." We formulated a plan in hushed voices. Thomas knew of a lawyer in town, a Mr. Daniel Hutchins, who had a reputation for taking difficult cases and for treating colored folk with basic dignity. But we needed something more tangible than mysterious ledger entries. We needed someone to see what I had seen, to witness the impossibilities that occurred within these walls. I returned to my workshop before dawn, my mind racing. I went through the motions of my work, but my hands felt different now, foreign. Each ache in my joints was a reminder of what had been taken from me, without my knowledge or consent. Mr. Whitmore appeared at midday, carrying a bolt of fabric so dark it seemed to absorb the light around it. "A new commission, Abigail, my most important client yet." His pale eyes fixed on my face. "I trust our little conversation last night has not diminished your dedication to quality work." So he was acknowledging it, the pretense of ignorance stripped away. "What am I really making?" I asked, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through me. "What happens to these garments?" He smiled, that thin smile. "You are creating vessels, dear Abigail, containers for what my clients wish to shed, or what they wish to claim. Suffering, age, disease, even death itself, can be woven into cloth, transferred from one soul to another. It is an old art, older than this country, older than memory, and you, with your extraordinary gift, are one of the few who can practice it properly. I never agreed to this, did you not?" He set the fabric on my table. "You signed a contract of employment, you accepted payment, and with each stitch, you consented to the exchange. That is how these things work. Magic requires agreement, even if that agreement is given in ignorance." My stomach turned. "The other what happened to them?" "They became too weak to continue. The work takes its toll, as you are beginning to understand. But do not worry, I have been pleased with your production. You will last longer than most." He moved toward the door. "This commission must be completed by tomorrow evening. It is a death shroud, Abigail. A very wealthy man wishes to transfer his impending mortality to someone else. The payment will be substantial, and who will bear his death?" Mr. Whitmore paused at the threshold. "Why, whoever wears the shroud, of course. I believe I shall have it delivered to your boarding house. Your landlady, Mrs. Dalton, has been complaining of the cold. A fine blanket would be such a thoughtful gift." Ice flooded my veins. "No, I will not do it. I will not kill an innocent woman." His expression did not change, but something dark moved behind his eyes. "Then I shall be forced to inform the authorities about certain irregularities in your papers. Freedom papers can be so easily questioned, especially for a colored woman living alone. Questions lead to investigations. Investigations lead to claims of fugitive status. You understand what happens then?" The threat was clear. In 1860, in Virginia, such accusations could mean re-enslavement, or worse. My freedom, hard-won and carefully protected, could be stripped away with a word from a man like Cornelius Whitmore. "You have until tomorrow evening," he said softly. "I suggest you choose wisely." When he left, I collapsed into my chair, my whole body shaking. The fabric on the table seemed to pulse with a darkness that had nothing to do with dye or weave. I could feel malevolence radiating from it, hungry and patient. That night, I did not sleep. Instead, I examined every inch of my workshop, looking for something, anything, that might help me understand how to break free from this nightmare. In the back of a drawer, I found a small journal, its pages yellowed with age. The handwriting was feminine, precise. My name was Eleanor Webb. I was the first seamstress in this workshop. If you are reading this, you are likely the next. Know this: the fabric holds the magic, but the needle guides it. Mr. Whitmore believes he controls the exchange, but he is wrong. The seamstress holds the true power. She can redirect the transfer. She can change the destination. I learned this too late to save myself, but perhaps you can use this knowledge. The ritual requires 3 elements: the fabric, the needle, and blood. His blood, freely given. Find a way to make him bleed upon the work, and you can turn his own magic against him. I read the passage 3 times, my mind working through possibilities. Making Mr. Whitmore bleed would not be simple. He was always careful, always controlled. But perhaps there was a way. I looked at the dark fabric on my table, then at the needle in my hand. My fingers ached with borrowed age. My lungs struggled with transferred disease. I thought of Mrs. Dalton, kind and warm, who had given me a home when others turned me away. I thought of my sister, depending on my wages for her survival. And I thought of all the women who had suffered in this workshop before me, their lives drained away stitch by stitch. No more. I would create the shroud, but not as Mr. Whitmore intended. I would weave it with purpose and direction, with all the skill my grandmother had passed down through generations, and I would find a way to make Cornelius Whitmore bleed. The first pale light of dawn crept through my window as I threaded my needle with black silk. My hands, though aching, moved with absolute certainty. I had a terrible work to complete. The shroud took shape beneath my hands like a living thing, dark and patient, and waiting to be filled. I worked through the day and into the evening, my fingers moving in patterns that felt ancient, remembered in my bones rather than learned from books. Every stitch was placed with intention, every thread pulled with purpose. Thomas came to my door near midnight, carrying bread and water, as had become his habit. "You look terrible," he said bluntly. "You ain't slept in days. I am finishing the commission, but I need your help with something else." I showed him Eleanor Webb's journal entry, watching his face as he read. His expression shifted from confusion to horror, to something like grim understanding. "You mean to turn this evil back on him?" "I mean to end it, for myself, and for whoever might come after me." I set down my needle. "But I need his blood, and I need it to appear accidental. He must not suspect." Thomas was quiet for a long moment, thinking. "Tomorrow evening, when you deliver the finished work, he'll want to inspect it. He always does, runs his fingers over every seam and stitch. What if the needle you used was left in the fabric, positioned just so?" It was risky. Mr. Whitmore was careful and observant, but it was also the only plan that might work. "There is something else," I said. "I need you to bring Mr. Daniel Hutchins here tomorrow night, the lawyer. Tell him there is a case of exploitation and theft that requires immediate attention. Tell him to bring a witness with authority, someone who cannot be easily dismissed." "That's a tall order. What reason would I give?" "Tell him there are documents proving a pattern of deaths connected to this mill. Tell him a woman's life is in immediate danger." I met his eyes steadily. "Because it is true." Thomas nodded slowly. "I'll do what I can. But Abigail, if this goes wrong, if he realizes what you're attempting, then I will already be dead, one way or another. I would rather die fighting than waste away in this workshop, being drained piece by piece." After Thomas left, I returned to my work. The shroud was nearly complete, a masterpiece of dark beauty that made my skin crawl to touch. I could feel the emptiness within it, the hunger for what it was meant to contain. Death transferred and transformed into cloth, but I was changing the pattern. With each stitch, I was not creating a vessel to hold mortality, but a mirror to reflect it. The death would return to its source, to the man who had orchestrated so many deaths before. As dawn approached, I placed the final stitches. Then, with trembling hands, I positioned a needle within the fabric, angled precisely where Mr. Whitmore's finger would press when he examined the hem. It was a seamstress's needle, long and sharp, darkened with a mixture of my own blood and iron filings. According to Eleanor's instructions, the journal had been explicit: his blood, freely given. A prick from a concealed needle might not count as freely given, but it was a moment of carelessness, a choice to examine the work without proper caution. In the old magic, such distinctions mattered. I prayed it would be enough. Mr. Whitmore arrived precisely at 6 o'clock in the evening, as he always did for completed commissions. He entered my workshop with his usual silent grace, his pale eyes assessing me with disturbing intensity. "You look unwell, Abigail." "I am tired, sir." The work was demanding. All meaningful work is demanding. He approached the table where the shroud lay folded. "Let me see what you have created." I stepped back, my heart pounding so hard I feared he could hear it. He lifted the shroud, spreading it across the table with careful hands. His long fingers traced the seams, checking the quality of each stitch. "Remarkable," he murmured. "Your finest work yet. I can feel the power woven into every thread." His hand moved along the hem, closer to where I had hidden the needle. Closer. I held my breath. His finger pressed against the fabric, and I saw the exact moment the needle pierced his skin. He jerked his hand back with a sharp intake of breath. A single drop of blood welled from his fingertip, dark as ink. "Careless," he hissed, examining the wound. "You left a needle in the work." "My apologies, sir. I was so focused on completion. I must have overlooked it." He wrapped his handkerchief around his finger, but the damage was done. The blood had already touched the fabric, already been absorbed into the weave. I could see the shroud darken slightly, as if drinking deeply of what it had been given. Mr. Whitmore's expression changed. Confusion flickered across his face, then something that might have been fear. "What have you done?" His voice was no longer soft. It carried an edge of panic. "I completed the commission as requested, sir. A shroud to hold death. Is it not satisfactory?" He looked at the fabric in his hands, then at me, understanding dawning in his pale eyes. "You changed it. You altered the pattern." "I merely followed the instructions left by my predecessor." Eleanor Webb was kind enough to leave guidance for future seamstresses. For the first time since I had known him, Cornelius Whitmore's composure cracked. He threw the shroud away from him as if it burned, but I could see the change already beginning. His hands, always steady, began to tremble. His breath came shorter. "You cannot do this," he said, his voice raw. "I am protected. I have taken precautions. Years of transferred vitality, decades of collected youth. And now it returns to you, all at once. Every death you meant for others, every burden you transferred through my work, and the work of those before me, the shroud will take it all back." He stumbled, catching himself against the table. "I will destroy you for this. Your freedom papers, your sister's safety, everything you care about will burn." "Perhaps," I said quietly, "but you will not live to see it." A knock sounded at the workshop door. Thomas's voice called out, "Mr. Whitmore, Mr. Daniel Hutchins is here with Sheriff Morrison. They say it's urgent legal business." Mr. Whitmore turned toward the door, his face contorting with rage and fear. But before he could speak, before he could spin whatever lies might save him, his legs gave way beneath him. He collapsed to the floor, gasping. I walked to the door and opened it myself. For the first time in weeks, leaving my workshop of my own volition. Thomas stood there with two men, one in a lawyer's coat, the other wearing a sheriff's badge. "Gentlemen," I said, my voice steady and clear, "I am Abigail Foster. I have been held in forced labor in this workshop, subjected to exploitation and theft of my health and wages. I have documentation to prove it, and I believe my employer is currently experiencing the consequences of his own crimes." Behind me, Mr. Whitmore made a sound like fabric tearing. Mr. Daniel Hutchins was a man of medium height, with sharp eyes that missed very little. He stepped into the workshop, took in the scene before him with a measured glance, and set down his leather case with careful precision. "Sheriff Morrison," he said, without looking away from Mr. Whitmore's collapsed form, "I believe we have arrived at a most opportune moment." The sheriff, a broad-shouldered man with silver in his beard, moved past me to examine Mr. Whitmore. "He's breathing, but barely." "What happened here?" "A workplace accident," I said, the lie coming smoothly. Mr. Whitmore was examining a completed commission when he suddenly took ill. Mr. Whitmore tried to speak, but all that emerged was a wet, rattling sound. His pale eyes fixed on me with pure hatred, but his body would not obey his commands. The shroud lay crumpled on the floor beside him, still radiating that terrible darkness. Mr. Hutchins picked up the ledger I had left open on my work table, the one Thomas had retrieved from the record room at my request. His expression grew increasingly grim as he read. "Sheriff Morrison, these documents detail a pattern of exploitation spanning 15 years. Young women employed as seamstresses, subjected to dangerous working conditions, confined to this workshop against their will." He turned a page. "There are also financial irregularities, payments listed without proper accounting, commissions recorded with no corresponding wages paid to the seamstress who completed the work. "Now wait just a minute," the sheriff began. "Cornelius Whitmore is a respected businessman. These are serious accusations. They are documented facts." Mr. Hutchins replied calmly. He gestured to me. "Miss Foster, would you be willing to provide testimony regarding your treatment in this establishment?" I took a breath, feeling the weight of the moment. Everything I said now would determine not only my fate, but potentially the fate of others who might come after. I was hired 24 months ago as head seamstress. The position was presented as an opportunity, with fair wages and good conditions. But within weeks, Mr. Whitmore began implementing restrictions. I was confined to this workshop, forbidden to leave, except on Sundays. My meals were controlled, my sleep interrupted. I was required to work through the night on special commissions, without additional compensation. "Do you have proof of this confinement?" the sheriff asked. I showed him the locks on the workshop door, both engaged from the outside. I showed him the cot in the corner where I had been forced to sleep. I showed him the meager rations that had been my meals for weeks. Thomas spoke up. "I'm the night watchman, sir. I can confirm everything Miss Foster says. I seen how Mr. Whitmore treated her, and the others before her. 5 seamstresses in 3 years, all of them leaving broken or disappeared. One of them died," I added quietly. "Her name was Margaret Chen. You found her in the river 6 months ago. She worked in this very workshop before me." The sheriff's expression shifted. I could see the memory clicking into place. The death that had been ruled a suicide without proper investigation. Mr. Hutchins moved to the filing cabinets, pulling out more ledgers. "There is also the matter of the special commissions. The accounting here is deliberately obscure, but it appears Mr. Whitmore was charging extraordinary sums for garments created by Miss Foster, while providing her only a fraction of the agreed wages. He kept 2 sets of books," I said, "one for public inspection, one for his private records. Thomas can show you where they are kept." Mr. Whitmore made another attempt to speak, managing only a choked whisper. "Lies, all lies." But his denials carried no weight. The evidence was overwhelming, documented in his own hand. Mr. Hutchins straightened, his jaw set. "Sheriff Morrison, I am formally requesting that you place Mr. Cornelius Whitmore under arrest for fraud, exploitation, and unlawful confinement. I am also requesting an immediate investigation into the deaths and disappearances of the women who worked in this facility." The sheriff hesitated. I could see the calculation in his eyes, weighing the word of a colored seamstress against a white businessman. "Even with documentation and witnesses, she's a Negro woman making accusations against a pillar of this community," he said slowly. "That's going to require more than some confusing ledgers and the word of a night watchman. Then perhaps this will suffice." Mr. Hutchins produced a folded document from his case. I took the liberty of obtaining affidavits from 3 other women who worked for Mr. Whitmore in the past. They describe similar patterns of abuse and confinement. I also have a letter from Mrs. Henderson, the client who complained about Miss Foster's work. It seems Mr. Whitmore forged her complaint to justify increased control over his employee. The sheriff's resistance began to crumble. "Even so, the man is clearly ill. Arresting him in this condition will prevent him from fleeing or destroying evidence." Mr. Hutchins interrupted, "Which I suspect he would do the moment he recovers, if he recovers." I watched Mr. Whitmore on the floor, his trembling growing worse. The shroud beside him seemed to pulse with the darkness visible even in the lamplight. Whatever was happening to him was far beyond any illness the sheriff could comprehend. "There is one more thing," I said quietly. I retrieved Eleanor Webb's journal from my drawer. The first seamstress to work in this workshop left a record of her experiences. She describes the same patterns of control and confinement. She also describes becoming ill with symptoms that matched her wealthy clients exactly, as if their diseases had been transferred to her. I did not mention the magic, the impossible exchanges, the true nature of what had occurred within these walls. Such things would only undermine my credibility, but the journal's descriptions of physical abuse and exploitation were damning enough. Mr. Hutchins read several passages aloud, his voice growing colder with each word. When he finished, he turned to the sheriff with barely contained anger. "How many women must suffer before justice is served? How many must die?" The sheriff looked at Mr. Whitmore, then at the evidence surrounding him, and finally nodded. "I'll place him under arrest, but he needs medical attention first." "Of course," Mr. Hutchins agreed, "though I suspect no doctor will find a cure for what ails him." As the sheriff went to summon help, Mr. Whitmore's eyes found mine again. His lips moved, forming words I could barely hear. "You have killed me." "No," I said softly. "You killed yourself. I merely returned what you tried to give to others." The shroud on the floor seemed to darken further, drinking in the lamplight, and Cornelius Whitmore's trembling increased, his breath growing shallower, as every year he had stolen, every life he had drained, came flooding back to claim what was always rightfully his. They carried Mr. Whitmore from the workshop on a stretcher, his body convulsing with tremors that no doctor could explain. I watched from the doorway as they loaded him into a carriage, his pale eyes still fixed on me with impotent rage. The shroud remained on my workshop floor, folded and quiet now, its terrible work nearly complete. 3 days later, I stood in the circuit courthouse, a simple building with high windows that let in the autumn light. The room was crowded with observers, drawn by scandal and curiosity. A colored woman accusing a wealthy white businessman was entertainment in a way that made my stomach turn. Judge Albert Thornton presided, an elderly man with a reputation for fairness that I prayed would prove true. Mr. Hutchins sat beside me at the plaintiff's table, his confidence a steadying presence. Across from us, Mr. Whitmore's attorney, a Mr. Victor Carlyle, shuffled papers with visible irritation. Mr. Whitmore himself was absent, too ill to attend. The doctors had found nothing physically wrong with him, yet he continued to decline, aging before their eyes, his body consuming itself from within. Judge Thornton called the proceedings to order. "We are here to address the charges brought by Miss Abigail Foster against Mr. Cornelius Whitmore, specifically allegations of unlawful confinement, wage theft, and exploitation. Mr. Hutchins, you may present your case." Mr. Hutchins stood, his voice clear and measured. "Your Honor, the evidence will show that Mr. Whitmore systematically exploited vulnerable women, confining them to his textile mill under conditions that amount to involuntary servitude. We have documentation, witness testimony, and physical evidence of this abuse." He presented the ledgers first, walking the judge through the discrepancies between public records and private accounting. The numbers told a stark story. Thousands of dollars charged to clients for commissions, mere pennies paid to the seamstresses who created them. Miss Foster was promised fair wages, Mr. Hutchins continued. Instead, she was confined to a workshop, locked in each night, denied freedom of movement, and forced to work excessive hours without proper compensation or rest. Mr. Carlyle rose, his expression dismissive. "Your Honor, Mr. Whitmore runs a demanding business. The textile industry requires dedication and long hours. Miss Foster signed a contract agreeing to these terms. Did she agree to be locked in?" Mr. Hutchins countered. "Did she consent to having her movements restricted, her correspondence monitored, her very freedom curtailed? She was free to leave at any time, was she?" Mr. Hutchins gestured to Thomas, who had taken a seat in the gallery. "The night watchman will testify that the workshop was locked from the outside each evening. Miss Foster could not have left if she wished." Thomas stood when called, his testimony straightforward and unshakable. He described the locks, the isolation, the fear he had witnessed in 5 different women over 3 years. "And what happened to these women?" Judge Thornton asked. "One is dead, sir. Found in the river. 2 disappeared without a trace. 1 left Richmond in the middle of the night and never came back. And now Miss Foster sits before you." The courtroom stirred. I could feel the shift in attention, the beginning of belief. Mr. Hutchins called me to testify next. I approached the witness stand with my head high, though my knees shook beneath my skirts. "Miss Foster," Mr. Hutchins began gently, "please describe your treatment in Mr. Whitmore's employment." I told them everything. The progressive restrictions, the locked doors, the controlled meals, the endless work through day and night. I told them about the strange commissions, though I left out the impossibilities, framing them merely as oddly demanding clients. I told them about the cot in the corner, the aching in my joints that had appeared since I began the work, the weakness in my lungs. "Were you free to leave this position?" Mr. Hutchins asked. "No, sir. Mr. Whitmore made it clear that if I tried, he would question my freedom papers, claim I was a fugitive. In Virginia, such accusations carry terrible consequences, even when false, so he used the threat of re-enslavement to control you." "Yes, sir." A murmur ran through the courtroom. This was a charge that resonated, that crossed the boundaries of race and sympathy. Even those who might dismiss the complaints of a colored woman could recognize the evil in such a threat. Mr. Carlyle cross-examined me aggressively, trying to paint me as ungrateful, insubordinate. a liar seeking to profit from false accusations. But I held steady, answering each question with calm precision. I had survived Mr. Whitmore's workshop. I could survive his lawyer's words. Then, Mr. Hutchins played his final hand. He called Mrs. Janet Morrison, the sheriff's own wife, to testify. The courtroom fell silent as she approached the stand. She was a dignified woman of middle years, clearly uncomfortable but determined. Mrs. Morrison, Mr. Hutchins, said, "You have had dealings with Mr. Whitmore's business, have you not?" "Yes, he created a gown for my daughter's wedding 2 years ago." "And who made that gown?" "A seamstress named Margaret Chen. She was very talented, very sweet." Mrs. Morrison's voice caught. "She died not long after completing the commission." "Did you know Miss Chen personally?" "Yes. I visited the workshop several times during the creation of the gown. She seemed frightened, exhausted. She told me she was not allowed to leave, that she was locked in each night." Tears appeared in Mrs. Morrison's eyes. "I did not help her. I thought she was exaggerating. And then she was found in the river, and I have wondered ever since if I could have prevented it." The confession hung in the air, heavy with guilt and truth. Judge Thornton's expression had gone very still. "Why did you not come forward before?" he asked quietly. "Because I was afraid no one would believe me. Because Mr. Whitmore is powerful and respected, and Margaret Chen was just a Chinese girl working as a seamstress. Who would listen?" She turned to look directly at me. But when I heard Miss Foster was bringing charges, I knew I could not stay silent again. Mr. Carlyle had no questions for her. What could he say? Judge Thornton adjourned for deliberation. We waited in a small room while he reviewed the evidence, the minutes stretching into hours. Thomas brought me water. Mr. Hutchins reviewed his notes. I sat in silence, feeling the weight of all those who had come before me, all those who had suffered in that workshop. When we were called back, the courtroom was hushed. Judge Thornton looked at me, then at the empty chair where Mr. Whitmore should have sat. "I have reviewed the evidence presented, and I find it compelling and disturbing. The documentation alone shows clear wage theft and fraudulent business practices. The testimony establishes a pattern of unlawful confinement and exploitation. But more than that, it reveals a systematic abuse of power, a deliberate targeting of vulnerable women who believed they had no recourse." He paused, his voice hardening. "Mr. Cornelius Whitmore is found guilty of fraud, wage theft, and unlawful confinement. I am ordering the immediate seizure of his assets to compensate Miss Foster and any other victims who come forward. I am also ordering a full criminal investigation into the death of Margaret Chen and the disappearances of the other seamstresses." The courtroom erupted. I felt Mr. Hutchins's hand on my shoulder, steadying me as relief and vindication washed through my body. But Judge Thornton was not finished. "Furthermore, I am directing that the workshop in question be permanently closed, and its contents examined for evidence of additional crimes. No one will work in that space again." He looked directly at me, his expression softening slightly. "Miss Foster, you have shown remarkable courage in coming forward. You have potentially saved others from the same fate you endured. The court thanks you and wishes you well in your recovery." As we left the courthouse, I saw a messenger arrive with urgent news. Mr. Whitmore had died that morning, his body found in his bed, aged beyond recognition, as if he had lived and died several lifetimes in the span of a week. The shroud had completed its work. I felt no triumph at his death, only a quiet sense of balance restored. The evil he had woven had returned to its source, as all evil eventually must. The workshop stands empty now, sealed by order of the court. I walked past it today on my way to my new position at Mrs. Thornton's dress shop, and felt nothing but a distant relief that those walls will never again hold another woman in their grip. The judge's ruling brought me enough compensation to send my sister through 3 full years of school. She writes that she is studying to become a teacher, that she will use her education to help other colored children learn to read and write. My suffering has purchased her freedom to choose her own path. That is no small thing. Thomas found other employment as well. At a factory where the owner treats his workers with basic human dignity. He stops by Mrs. Dalton's boarding house sometimes for Sunday supper, and we share the comfortable silence of those who have witnessed darkness together and survived. Mr. Hutchins took no fee for his representation. He said my case had exposed a cruelty that needed exposing, and that was payment enough. He has since taken on 3 other cases of exploitation in the textile industry, each time citing my testimony as precedent. Perhaps some good will grow from what was planted in evil soil. The doctors never could explain what killed Cornelius Whitmore. They wrote rapid aging syndrome of unknown origin on the death certificate, a meaningless collection of words to describe an impossible truth. I know what killed him, the same thing that would have killed me, and Margaret Chen, and Eleanor Webb, and all the others whose names I will never know. I burned the shroud in Mrs. Dalton's fireplace one night, feeding it to the flames piece by piece. It resisted burning at first, the dark fabric seeming to writhe in the heat, but eventually it surrendered to ash. I scattered those ashes in the river at dawn, whispering the names of the women I knew had died, hoping their spirits might find some peace in the offering. My hands still ache sometimes. My lungs still catch on cold mornings. The borrowed afflictions Mr. Whitmore wove into my body did not entirely disappear with his death, but they have lessened, and I have learned to live with what remains, the way we all must learn to live with the scars that survival requires. I sew different things now, wedding gowns still, and christening dresses, but also simple clothes for working women who need sturdy fabric and honest stitching. I charge fair prices and take pleasure in the work again, the way I did when I first learned the craft at my mother's side. There are nights when I dream of that workshop, of shadows moving in corners and bells ringing 3 times at midnight. I wake with my heart racing, reaching for a lamp that casts away the darkness. But the dreams come less frequently now. The workshop is sealed. The evil is ended. I am free. This is the last entry I will make in this journal. I have recorded what happened so that it might be remembered, so that the women who suffered might not be forgotten, so that anyone who finds these pages in some distant future might understand that there were those who fought back against cruelty, who refused to be broken, who survived. My name is Abigail Foster. I was a seamstress of extraordinary talent. I lived through terrible things and came out the other side, not unmarked, but unbroken. That is enough. That will always be enough. Note, appended by archival staff, Richmond Historical Society, 1947. This journal was discovered during the demolition of the old Whitmore Textile Mill, sealed in a wooden box beneath the floorboards of what records indicate was the private commission workshop. Accompanying the journal were several other documents, employment contracts, financial ledgers, and a smaller journal attributed to one Eleanor Webb, dated 1840-3. Research into the individuals named within has confirmed that Abigail Foster lived until 1912, operating a successful dressmaking business in Richmond and later in Philadelphia. She never married but was known in her community as a woman of quiet strength who employed and mentored dozens of young seamstresses throughout her life, always ensuring they worked in safe conditions with fair compensation. The fate of Margaret Chen, referenced in the journal, was indeed ruled a suicide in 1859, but contemporary newspaper accounts suggest the investigation was perfunctory. The deaths and disappearances of 4 other women connected to the Whitmore workshop have been documented through census records and missing persons reports. Cornelius Whitmore's death certificate, obtained from county records, confirms the date and unusual medical notation mentioned in the journal. The mill was sold to pay compensation to victims, then eventually abandoned and fell into disrepair. This document has been preserved as part of our collection on labor conditions and civil rights in pre-Civil War Virginia. It stands as testimony to both the cruelty of exploitation and the courage of resistance. The workshop itself was destroyed during demolition. Workers reported unusual difficulty in tearing down that particular section of the building, with several experiencing unexplained illness during the process. The site now holds a small memorial garden, maintained by the Richmond Women's Historical Society, dedicated to those who suffered in service of others' greed. May their stories never be forgotten.